My name is Reverend Ruben Austria, and as long as we're disabusing people of notions, although I am an ordained minister, ordained by Reverend Michael Carrion, and spent time doing ministry in the house of Reverend Raymond Rivera, I'm not currently pastoring a house of worship. The reason is because I've been guilty in my ministry of having tunnel vision around one issue, and that issue is young people and their risk of involvement in the juvenile justice system. It's what God has called me to speak on, it's what God has called me to act on, and I want to share with you a brief word about the church's call to stand in the gap on behalf of young people. I run an organization called Community Connections for Youth, and our mission is to empower grassroots faith and neighborhood organizations to develop alternatives to incarceration for youth. And I want you to know that when I started my ministry, like many people, I was asking the question, what's wrong with our young people? I was seeing the crime in the streets, I was seeing the violence, I was seeing all of the things that young people were doing, and I was saying, what is wrong with young people? And in the course of doing this ministry, God showed me that I was asking the wrong question. Because when God took Moses and brought him before that burning bush and said, I'm concerned, he didn't say, I'm concerned of what the Israelites are doing to one another. He said, I'm concerned because I see my people, I see the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, I see them enslaved, and I am concerned. And what I want to share to you briefly today is what I believe God's heart and concern is for young people in this day. I want to keep it in the scriptures. In the second chapter of Exodus, or in the first chapter of Exodus, we understand that the Israelites are people living in slavery in Egypt. And I see four parallels today between the state of the juvenile justice system, the criminal justice system, and what was happening in ancient Egypt. It says that a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. And look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them. And in ancient Egypt, they were concerned about a growing minority population, a population that was foreign, that spoke a different tongue, had a different religion, came from a different place. And if you walk into any of our juvenile justice centers today, any detention center, you will see that 99%, I'm not exaggerating, an NYU study found this to be true, 99% of the young people in the juvenile justice system are young people of color. 99% of the ones that we send upstate, young people of color. 99%. That's not justice, that's just us. Number two, oppression and fear. It says in the scripture, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, and the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. Fear tends to breed oppression, and oppression tends to breed more fear. And if you remember 20 years ago, criminologists and academics and sociologists in the highest levels of the land were talking about a new breed of juvenile super predators. And they said these kids would be so bad, these kids who would be coming of age at this time, that they would murder, rape, kill, rob, they would be like nothing we'd ever seen before. And the country began to build jails, and they began to try more young people as adults, and all of it was based on fear of the image of a young person of color in the urban center. Number three, economic exploitation. Exodus 1:11 says they put slave masters over them to oppress them, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. One of the reasons Pharaoh was so reluctant to let the people go was because they were economically profitable for Egypt. Yeah. They were the free labor. Right. And you see right now that there are counties all over this country that refuse to give up their prisons because their prisons provide the jobs, and they provide the services, and they provide the goods. It costs $300,000 to incarcerate one young person for 1 year in New York City. Think about that for a second. $300,000. $300,000 for one young person. It's gotten so bad that in places like Pennsylvania, judges have been indicted for selling young people's admission to a detention center. We see that the federal government has set a quota of 34,000 immigrants that must be maintained in detention. We see places like Ferguson, the report came out this week that nearly a quarter of the city's revenue was based on fines and tickets and criminal sanctions for African Americans. Right. And so people who don't want to let go of this whole incarceration complex, they don't want to let go because there's money attached to it. That's right. And finally, you see, as you saw in ancient Egypt, you see the pattern of genocide where eventually the command comes to throw every young boy into the Nile. And we've seen the effect of decades of criminal justice policy that has decided that our young people, rather than being invested in and loved and cared for and nurtured, are just something to be coerced and controlled. And we've seen that when young people get locked up, there's a 90% recidivism rate. Almost a guarantee they will go on into the adult system. Countless stories you hear of young people being beaten up in jail, hanging themselves, committing suicide, being beaten by guards, being beaten by the young people. Truly, there is a generation being destroyed. But I didn't come here just to share with you bad news. I came to share with you what I believe the good news is. I believe that wherever there's bad news, God has a plan to deliver. God has a plan to use his people to bring deliverance to the young. Because here's what happened in the 2nd chapter of Exodus. Moses' parents, they knew he was a fine child. They saw the worth and the value in this boy. And they hid him for as long as they could. But at a certain time, they got overwhelmed and they put the basket in the Nile. You know the story. And it says this, that there was somebody who wasn't ready to give up yet. It says that his sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. She waited and watched. She paid attention. She wasn't willing to give up yet. And in God's sovereign plan, it just so happened that Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile and saw the basket among the reeds and opened it and saw the baby, and it said that he was crying and she felt sorry for him. And Moses' sister right here, a girl maybe no more than 12 years old, Miriam, she sees a strategic opportunity, and while Pharaoh's daughter is trying to figure out what to do with this Hebrew baby, she says, "Shall I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse him for you?" And God gives favor to this girl's request, and Pharaoh's daughter tells her, "Yes, go," and the girl went and got the baby's mother, and so this child, who was one step from going up the river, like so many of our babies go up the Hudson River to facilities in upstate New York, she gets returned to the care of her own mother. And not only that, Pharaoh's daughter says to his mother, "Take the baby and nurse him, and I will pay you to do so." And so the woman took the baby and nursed him, and so not only does this child get returned to his own mother, not only does he get returned to the household of faith, not only does he get returned to his own community, but he gets returned with some resources to help the mother properly care for him. And so I believe that there is a blueprint for deliverance here that God is calling the church to do. And the first thing, one, is that we need to advocate for individual young people. We need to advocate. Do you know the difference that it would make if you in your house of worship, just to simply go to a court date with a young person, to go with them to see their probation officer, to stand with them before a judge and say, "Give this young person another chance. I'll help you find a suitable alternative in the community that he doesn't keep getting in trouble again. Bring him back to us." Number two, we need to advocate for the redirection of funds away from incarceration, away from this prison industrial complex back into our communities. We always hear the lie that there's no money for youth programs. We hear people say, well, there's nothing for these kids. We know that when kids get in trouble, they get in trouble because they have nothing to do. And imagine if that $300,000 that was incarcerated for one young person, imagine if you had that in your house of worship or your community to run some youth programs. We could save a generation. And finally, we need as the church to be willing to invest in the next generation of leaders. We need to be willing to read the times and see that there are going to be young people who God is going to raise up to go before Pharaoh, and they will be the ones to say, "Let my people go." Yeah. I believe, as I've seen how the church has related to young people, that too many of us have been stuck in the paradigm of trying to fix our young people, trying to tell them what's wrong with them, trying to get them to behave better. And what you see happen in the biblical story is that God didn't wait for the Egyptian or for the Israelites to get their act together before he acted for their deliverance. Yeah. And he sent that very same young person that his sister advocated for when he grew up. She went with him to Pharaoh to say, "Let my people go." And so some of us are going to have to join forces with our young people, the ones who are marching in the streets, the ones who are speaking out against this corrupt, brutal, and racist criminal justice system, and say with them, "Let my people go." And I believe that if we do this, we will see the deliverance of a generation. Thank you very much.